Today we're going to talk a little bit about why you should use the ChatGPT API over actually just using ChatGPT for kind of daily tasks. If you've got a little bit of programming experience or know a little bit about how to just call an API, that'll help. But almost anybody can do this with the right tools. First, let's start with what ChatGPT actually can't do that the API can't overcome. A friend of mine, Dan, actually made this GPT using the new kind of ChatGPT. You can create your own ChatGPT, and with that, he had an app that he's actually already been developing into a GPT. So you can see that here. This is the GPT he created. It's basically trying to be a personal trainer that kind of pushes you, swears at you, insults you maybe a little bit, just to kind of get you going. And so you can see here, I've kind of asked it a question: how do I stay motivated? And it has definitely replied with some spicy language. And now kind of when I later ask it, hey, can you be a little nicer? It really just tones it back. The original kind of version of this app, it does not tone it back. And part of that is actually what you're actually able to do with the API that you're not able to do with the GPT, what you're not able to do with ChatGPT itself. There is a lot of programmability that you actually get with the API that you're really kind of giving up just going through tasks with ChatGPT. And this is why like the pros use the API, right? This is why most people who are kind of building like real workflows using ChatGPT, solving real problems, they're mostly relying on the API because it's a lot more consistent and trainable. So let's go through a little bit of why that's the case. So first off, if we think about sort of like how this works, a user goes to ChatGPT, they make a request, they type something in, that talks to the OpenAI's API, right? And effectively what that kind of looks like is you basically send a message that goes into like your full chat history, right? The whole history of the conversation that you've been having. So whenever you type a new message in here, that'll kind of be added onto that full context of what the conversation has been so far. Of that, what goes to the API is actually not that whole context, it's a subset of it, right? If you've been like talking with ChatGPT for a while, you'll notice it kind of has some fall off, it may not remember things. And so when you kind of take that full chat history and you pull out part of that context, they'll also pull in a system prompt, something sort of like prompting it to act a certain way or try to be helpful to the user. And then OpenAI also has, of course, their own kind of tuning on top of this, right? Whether that's part of the model or just something that they add to API requests. That's sort of how those requests are made, right? And all of this goes into that OpenAI API, and out comes your response, right? But the challenge with this is really like this system prompt is something that you don't really have any access to, right? So if we're going to kind of like highlight the problem areas in a way, first would be kind of this space up here, right? With this kind of system prompt. And then the second issue is really like you also don't have a lot of control over like this piece, right? How this full chat history becomes the chat context that goes into this request, right? So there could be stuff that you've been talking about that is really important to your conversation that suddenly gets dropped. The way that it thinks about the history of that chat might actually be kind of different than what you had in mind. And you may actually not even want any history to be remembered. You might just actually want to be able to talk to it the same way every single time, right? So with just kind of ChatGPT, you don't get any control over this, right? The only control that a user really has is sort of this like request, right? That's the only thing that the user really can do anything with. And like, I mean, you can start a new session, you can kind of start your prompt, like act a certain way, but there's not a lot you can do in that regard. So really like what I'm suggesting is, well, let's just call the API, right? We can call it directly. Now I use a tool called Insomnia to make these API requests. It's just a convenient cloud tool that I use. It's kind of like Postman. And if you download it and open it up, it'll look something a little bit like this. Basically, we'll open it up. It'll have some sort of workspaces in here. If you create a new document like this, then you can kind of go here and get a HTTP request created. you need a post request and you need it to go to the completions endpoint. But when we actually make that request, you can kind of see what that looks like here. So we've got the model that we're requesting against. You've got a lot more control when you're calling the API about like which model you're going off of. You can also specify like a model version, which is really convenient because a lot of times if you're on kind of like the latest and greatest constantly, there are changes that may change how your prompting works. So if you're calling the API, you get a lot more control over like what you're talking to, right? Then you got a set of messages, right? You can specify your kind of system prompt that the application's using. You can specify sort of like what messages you're keeping track of that the user may have had in its history. And then, of course, you're going to add your OpenAI token. You can just set that as a bearer token in the type here. And of course, this is going to be JSON up here. So once this is all kind of set up, you can send your request. And when you get your request back, you'll get a completion and it'll show some content that you got back for your prompt, right? And so this gives you a lot more control. So if we think about like what you're doing now, you of course still can handle like any message that gets sent in, right? I could go kind of back in there and I can change like, this message, change all the messages that exist here. I can also change the system prompt, right? But, when you think about how these messages are made, you can see that now I have a lot more control over this end, right? So now you're not only controlling the message going in, but you're actually controlling the way that message is processed to OpenAI's API, right? So the biggest challenge with kind of like a GPT is that you don't get control over the prompt, right? When I had that example earlier where I asked it to be a little nicer and tone it down, right? That's because I'm not able to really do this. I'm not able to give it a system prompt, give it the last few messages, and then tack on some sort of control to the end of those messages, right? To like tell it, hey, like remember to behave a certain way, right? This is the kind of type of control that you really get with the API, right? But then you get a response at the other end that's a lot more controlled, right? And so now rather than, being able to tone it down, you ask it a question, even if you try and like prompt it or prompt inject and say like, hey, do it this way, it actually has the ability now to kind of like respond in this other way, right? Now the API is like, of course, really powerful, and you can go on and find in the documentation, I'll link it below, kind of like the full documentation for how to set this up. But really anybody can kind of go in, you can get your token from ChatGPT, you can go and make these requests, and that'll really help you control a lot more what you're getting with these AI models, right? So suffice it to say, use the API, and you'll have a lot better time using these AI models. If you've enjoyed learning about the API and have other thoughts about AI, feel free to reach out to us in the comments or go to our blog. We have a publication and a podcast on Stable Discussion where you can find out more information about us. So awesome. Thanks so much.